Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Today we're looking at, I guess, the world of liberating structures would be one way to put it.
Okay.
But really we're going to be looking at a specific one called min-specs.
All right.
And we have an expert to help us kind of unpack all this.
Sounds good.
Now, min-specs, the idea is that they're kind of like rules that actually make you more free.
Yeah.
Which sounds a little bit counterintuitive.
It does a little bit.
But maybe you can explain a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so min-specs are all about distilling things down to their very essence, like what's the absolute minimum
Okay.
you must do or must not do to achieve a specific purpose.
Okay.
And so it's really about stripping away all those shoulds and all those unnecessary constraints that kind of stifle creativity and innovation.
Oh, so it's like instead of having this laundry list of things we think we need to do,
Yeah,
it's really about identifying those core things that make a difference.
exactly.
Okay, but doesn't that run the risk of oversimplifying things?
Well, it's about finding that balance, right?
Okay.
You don't want to ignore potential complexities,
Right.
but you want to be intentional
Sure.
and discerning
Okay.
in what you choose to focus on.
So how do we go about actually figuring out what those min specs should be?
So the process starts by identifying what we call max specs.
Max specs?
Yeah. And this is basically just like a brain dump
Okay.
of all the possible rules and guidelines that could apply to your project.
Okay, so it's like the opposite. We're
Yeah.
just putting it all out there.
Put it all out there.
All the things we think we should be doing.
Put it all out there.
All the things we think we should be doing.
Exactly. And then
Exactly.
you ruthlessly challenge each rule
Okay.
against the core purpose by asking yourself, like, if we break this rule, could we still achieve our goal?
Oh, I see.
And if the answer is yes,
Then it's not really essential.
exactly.
It's not a min spec.
That makes sense. But I'm still kind of stuck on this idea of constraints leading to more freedom.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit? Sure. Imagine like a composer writing a symphony.
Oh.
If they didn't have any structure
Right.
or rules,
Yeah.
they would just have like a chaotic jumble of notes.
It'd just be noise.
Right. But by having a framework in place,
Yeah.
things like key signatures and time signatures,
Right.
they can create something beautiful and complex.
So the constraints in that case are actually what enabled the creativity.
Exactly.
It gives it form.
Yeah, it provides the boundaries
Okay.
for creative expression.
And it's the same then with these min specs.
Exact.
By defining those must-dos and must-not-dos, it creates that space to innovate.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like we're setting those boundaries,
Yeah,
and then within those boundaries, we're free
Oh,
to
yeah.
experiment and explore.
that's it.
Okay, I was starting to see the light here a little bit.
Good.
Now, one of the sources we have for this deep dive is about a senator who uses this approach to solve a problem.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was Senator Linda Bork-Moss
Mm-hmm.
and her work on drunk driving in Montana.
That's right.
And this was a pretty captivating story.
Oh, that is.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So Senator Moss was very passionate about addressing drunk driving in her state.
Uh-huh.
And she knew that passing legislation was going to require a lot of people working together.
Yeah, it's a complex problem.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not a simple solution.
So how did she use min-specs to help with this?
She realized that getting bogged down in all the details
Yeah.
and the bureaucratic hurdles
Right.
would just slow things down.
Uh-huh.
So she decided to just focus on what actions were absolutely necessary
Oh, wow.
from each person
Okay.
to achieve the shared goal.
So instead of trying to micromanage the whole thing,
Yeah.
she just said, all right, what are the things that really matter?
Yeah. What are the essential pieces?
Okay.
And it worked.
Wow.
By focusing on those actions, she was able to build consensus,
Okay.
cut through the red tape,
Uh-huh.
and actually pass legislation.
Yeah. So it sounds like min-specs can be used for more than just like little projects.
Absolutely.
Like this is a big societal problem.
Yeah.
So how can our listeners use min-specs maybe in their own work or in their personal lives?
Well, let's say you're on a team
Okay.
and you're struggling with communication
Yeah.
or unclear roles.
Uh-huh.
You could use min-specs to define those essential values
Uh-oh.
and behaviors
Okay.
that are going to guide your team's interactions.
So instead of having a bunch of rules,
Yeah.
it's more like what are the principles
Right. What are the things that really matter?
to make the team work well together?
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
Or imagine you're feeling overwhelmed by a new project at work.
Happens all the time.
Right. So min-specs can help you clarify the scope of the project
Okay.
and identify those minimum deliverables
Right.
that are needed for success.
So it's like a minimalist project management.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep you focused on what really matters.
And this can be used for personal stuff too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's say you're trying to build healthier habits.
Okay.
You could use min-specs to define your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Like those must-dos that support your well-being.
So things like exercising or getting enough sleep.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about creating that framework
Yeah.
that supports your well-being.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this all kind of ties back to this idea that less can be more when it comes to achieving goals and making progress.
So by focusing on the essential,
Yeah.
we create space for other things.
Exactly.
All right. I'm really starting to see the potential here.
Good. I'm glad.
And we'll be diving deeper into this in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
So stick around for that, everybody.
Welcome back to our deep dive into min-specs.
Glad to be back.
I hope you're starting to see how this seemingly simple concept can actually be really powerful.
Yeah, I think, one thing I've been thinking about is all the, max specs I've been carrying around.
Right.
Like, I feel like I'm weighed down by all these shoulds,
Right.
all these things I think I need to be doing. And
Right. And that's a good first step, is recognizing those areas
right.
where we might be overcomplicating things.
Yeah,
It's not about throwing out all structure and discipline.
right. It's about being more intentional,
Yes, exactly.
about the constraints we choose.
Yeah,
It's like that, freedom within form kind of thing.
right. You need some structure
Yeah,
to guide your efforts.
but it's about choosing those boundaries
Yeah,
that actually make us more effective
exactly.
and help us, reach our goals.
That's it.
You mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all those max specs.
Yeah.
Can you think of maybe a specific example in your own life where you feel like you get bogged down by that?
One area I definitely struggle with is time management.
Oh, yeah.
I always feel like I have a million things on my to-do list.
Right.
And I'm constantly switching between tasks.
Sure.
And I never really feel like I'm making progress on anything.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, and this is where min-specs can really help.
Okay.
So instead of trying to do everything at once,
Right.
let's focus on what tasks would really move the needle
Good point.
towards your most important goals.
So what are the must-dos that would make the biggest difference
Exactly.
if I focused on those things consistently?
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest ones for me would be to block off time each day
Okay.
for focused work.
Okay.
Like no distractions, no multitasking, just deep work.
That's great. And what would be like a must not do
No,
that would support that?
I must not do.
Yeah.
That would support that.
Yeah, something to help protect that dedicated work time.
I think for me, the biggest distraction is definitely like email and social media.
Oh, yeah.
So what must not do would be like disable notifications
Okay.
during those blocks of time.
I love it. You're already starting to identify those constraints.
Yeah.
That'll help you be more productive.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I'm shifting from this mindset of scarcity.
Yeah. Like never having enough time to like this abundance mindset
Right.
where I'm choosing.
You're being intentional
Yeah.
about how you spend your time.
Okay, so how about for like a creative project?
Yeah.
Like say I want to write a book.
Okay.
How could I use min-specs for that?
So instead of trying to write the whole book at once,
Which is overwhelming.
right, it can be very daunting.
Yeah.
What if you broke it down
Okay.
into smaller chunks?
Uh-huh.
What would be the minimum viable product
Mhm.
for your book project?
I guess it would be to like create an outline
Right.
of the whole book, like chapter by chapter,
Right.
and the key points.
That's great.
So it gives me that framework.
Exactly. And what would be a must-do
Okay.
to support that goal?
A must-do.
Yeah.
I think a must-do would be to write for at least 30 minutes every day,
Okay.
even if it's just brainstorming
Okay.
or fleshing out the outline.
Perfect. And what would be a must-not-do
Okay.
to protect that writing time? I think I tend to get bogged down in research.
Uh-huh.
So a must-not-do would be to set limits on my research time
Okay.
and really only focus on sources
Yep.
that are directly relevant to what I'm working on.
I love it. You're getting it.
So it's about simplifying.
Yes.
I
And
mean-
focusing on what truly matters.
It's give me permission to let go of perfectionism
Yes.
and just make progress.
That's it.
And it's not just for individual projects, right?
No.
You mentioned teams earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how can a team use min-specs to work better together?
So let's say your team is struggling with missed deadlines.
Yeah.
And a lack of accountability?
Happens all the time.
Right. So what could be a MinSpec
Okay.
to address that issue?
Mhm.
Well, one possibility is to have a daily stand-up meeting
Okay.
where everyone shares their top priorities for the day
Oh,
and any roadblocks they're facing.
that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's a simple way
Yeah.
to improve communication and accountability.
What would be a must not do
Yeah.
to support that?
A must-not-do could to allow those meetings
Yeah.
to turn into lengthy discussions
Oh, yeah.
or problem-solving sessions.
Keep it focused.
Yeah, short, focused, action-oriented.
Right. So it's almost like setting boundaries
Yeah.
for the meeting itself.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the specific MinSpecs you choose
What?
will depend on your team's challenges and goals.
Yeah.
But the principle's the same.
Right.
Identify the essential constraints
Okay.
and let go of everything else.
I'm really seeing the versatility here.
Yeah.
This can be applied to so many different things.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between structure and freedom,
Right.
clarity and flexibility.
Now, besides the examples we've talked about,
Yeah.
are there any other inspiring examples of how this has been used?
Yeah, there's a great example from the business world.
Okay.
This company was struggling with a complex product launch.
Okay.
They had tight deadlines,
Uh-huh.
limited resources,
Yeah.
and a lot of pressure to deliver.
Sounds stressful.
It was,
So how did they use MinSpecs?
well, they recognized that they couldn't do everything perfectly,
Right.
given the constraints.
Sure.
So they focused on identifying the minimum features
Right.
and functionalities needed for the launch.
So instead of the perfect product,
Yeah,
it was like a good enough product.
exactly.
Did he get it out there?
And then iterate based on feedback.
So it's like a more agile approach.
Yeah, exactly. Less is more.
Yeah, that's a great example of how MinSpecs can help us prioritize
Yeah,
when things feel really complicated.
that's right.
Like it helps us to focus on what really matters
Exactly.
and let go of that perfectionism.
Yeah.
Okay, so this idea can be applied to personal projects too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Learning a new language.
Okay.
Instead of trying to master every grammar rule
Right.
before you even start speaking,
Yeah.
what if you focused on
Okay.
a few key phrases
Right.
that would allow you to have basic conversations?
So it's finding that minimum viable product
Yeah.
for language learning.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you can build on that foundation.
So what would be a must-do in that situation?
A must-do could be to commit to having at least one conversation
Okay.
in the target language every day,
Every day.
even if it's just a brief exchange.
Wow, okay.
And a must-not-do might be to avoid getting bogged down
Okay.
in grammar textbooks
Right.
or overly complex learning materials.
It's about just doing it.
Yeah, just focus on practical application
Yeah.
and consistent practice,
Ugh.
even if it's imperfect.
I'm seeing how MinSpecs
Yeah,
can really apply to almost anything.
it's a framework for simplifying,
Yeah.
prioritizing,
Yeah.
making intentional choices.
So as we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I
Yeah.
want to encourage everyone to think about their own max specs.
Yeah.
What are those rules and expectations
Oh.
that might be weighing you down?
What can you let go of
Yeah,
to create more space?
it's a good question to think about. And we'll continue this conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive on MinSpecs.
Good to be back.
We've been talking about, what they are,
Yeah.
and we've looked at some examples
Mm-hmm.
and even, started to identify some of those max specs in our own lives.
That's right. Those things that are holding us back.
But how do we actually put this into practice?
So think of it like building a house.
Okay.
We've got the blueprint,
Uh-huh.
the land.
Right.
Now it's time to lay the foundation.
Okay, so what's the first brick?
Action.
Action. Okay.
Start small.
Yeah.
Pick one area
Okay.
where you want to apply this.
Okay.
Maybe a personal goal, a project at work,
Uh-huh.
even just a simple habit change.
So don't try to do everything at once.
No, start with one thing.
Okay.
What about those MinSpecs we talked about for your time management?
Oh, yeah.
Blocking out focused work time,
Right.
silencing notifications.
Yeah, we can start there.
Okay, great.
I like that idea, but what if it fall back into old patterns?
It's all about consistency
Okay.
and accountability.
Uh-huh.
Think of those MinSpecs as your guiding principles.
Okay.
Write them down,
Okay.
post them somewhere visible,
Yeah.
share them with a friend.
Oh, so they can hold me accountable.
Exactly.
Like
Don't
that.
be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
Adjust as needed.
So is that just a one-time thing?
No, it's an ongoing process.
Okay.
What works for one person
Right.
might not work for another.
Yeah. And what works for me today
Exactly.
might need to change tomorrow.
Be flexible, be adaptable.
So are there any downsides to using MinSpecs?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It's important to find that balance.
Okay.
While min specs are great for decluttering and focusing,
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't be used to avoid necessary complexity.
So we don't want to oversimplify things.
No.
Okay.
Use them strategically
Okay.
as a tool to guide your thinking.
Yeah. So like when would it maybe not be a good idea to use min spec?
Yeah. Well, if you're designing a bridge,
Huh.
you wouldn't want to oversimplify the safety regulations.
Right. You need to make sure it's safe.
Exactly.
Right.
But you could still use min specs
Okay.
to streamline the decision-making process.
Interesting. So it's about using them to enhance
Yeah,
our thinking, not to replace it.
that's right.
And I guess we should also use them ethically.
Absolutely.
Be mindful of the impact of our decisions.
Yeah, even when we're trying to keep things simple.
Exactly.
This has been really insightful.
Good. I'm
I'm feeling a lot more equipped
Yeah.
to tackle, all those things
The challenges and opportunities.
that come up in life.
That's right.
So thank you so much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
And to everybody listening,
Yeah.
go out there and try using min specs.
Embrace the power of simplicity.
Yeah, create something amazing.
Absolutely. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.